Hello everyone. I would like to start my presentation with an art conspiracy theory. It is the height of the Renaissance and Pope Julius II, now a successful and violent conqueror, is establishing his reputation as an earthly ruler through scholarly art and architecture. We have Bramante, the ingenious architect of St. Peter's, and we have Michelangelo, who at the time was constructing Pope Julius II's tomb, a tomb to outshine all tombs. It is said that their rivalry prompted Bramante to put forward Raphael to complete the unfinished stanza of the Vatican over the already famed Michelangelo. Whilst this is speculation, it speaks to the context of the Renaissance, which I believe humanist Matteo Palmieri accurately captures in his work On Civic Life. Only today are they, artworks, being brought to a new pitch of perfection by men of genius and erudition. So the roles of artists and their artworks were changing and shifting away from medieval scholasticism towards complex debates on religion and intellectual thought, which produced lots of social and artistic anxieties, mainly over how to conduct a moral life of religion in an evolving but imperfect world, one of the great philosophical debates of the Renaissance. And this is really what Raphael's School of Athens is addressing. Painted from 1509 to 1511, it is housed in the Stanza della Signatura as one of 4 works, each averaging 16 by 26 feet, and respectively representing different subjects: theology, poetry, jurisprudence, and philosophy, the fresco we will be focusing on now. Assembled in a classical atrium, we view representatives of each phase of Greek philosophy, bound together by scholarly debate. Greek philosophy has been divided into 3 phases in the past: the material, the speculative, and the scientific. The first and third, being physical, occupy the lower level, whereas the speculative appears on the platform above. On the lower level to the left, we see Heraclitus, the lonely dreamer, actually said to be modelled off Michelangelo, who was painting the Sistine Chapel at the time. He is a representative of the Ionian school, alone perhaps as he had no one to sympathise with his theories, as it was the first effort of Greek thought to realise itself. In contrast, we see Pythagoras next to him, surrounded by his disciples, their numbers proving the popularity of his exoteric doctrine. The figure we see beside Pythagoras, leaning over as if to copy his work, is speculated to be Archytas, who had a very esoteric doctrine, perhaps lacking the solidarity with Pythagoras' numerical explanations. To the right we have Euclid, a philosopher of geometry, actually said to be modelled off Bramante. To the left of Euclid and his disciples we have Diogenes, the founder of Cynic philosophy, which perhaps explains why he is on his own. I should note that I won't be covering all of the philosophers, because there are too many and because there is a lot of debate surrounding their identification, and I don't mean to speculate. Most importantly, we have the 2 great philosophers from antiquity, Plato and Aristotle, at the focal point of the painting, each holding their own books and representing their contrasting philosophies. Plato being interested in the ethereal and the theoretical, hence pointing upwards, and Aristotle interested in the actual and the physical, hence his downward-facing palm. What these antithetical philosophies and copious, diverse forms create is an historia, a narrative, in particular the narrative of philosophy. It is interesting to note that the vectors created through the characters' bodily positions and the circular shape of the scholars is designed to reflect this philosophical narrative. The circle must end in its beginning. The whole round of philosophy must be traversed. It's also important to take note of the debate setting. A primary characteristic of the Renaissance was obviously the revival of classical treasures, and this was particularly prominent in architecture. Whilst the philosophers are from ancient Greece, the architecture takes on an arguably Roman look with its coffered barrel vaults and pilasters. In fact, the design of the actual space is very Bramantian, and is reminiscent of St. Peter's. There is also evidence of the ancient world in the two classical sculptures. On the Platonic side, we see Apollo, god of the sun, music, and poetry, whereas on the Aristotelian side, we see Athena, god of war and wisdom, which very much reflects their contrasting philosophies. Overall, it is definitely a grand structure that ennobles the figures it contains. Of course, attention to the human form is a pivotal aspect of Raphael's style here. Like many painters of the Renaissance period, Raphael truly understood the body's external physicality as an expression of the inner soul's spirituality. Not only are the figures realistically rendered, which reflects the scientific biological advancements of the time, but in such varied poses so intricately planned to reflect individual philosophical endeavour. It's also important to commend the painting's use of a one-point perspective, a Renaissance technique taken from Alberti's 1435 treatise, De Pictura. The focal or vanishing point of the School of Athens is at Plato's lowered hand, and we can really see, particularly in the cornices, how the orthogonals recede back to create quite a convincing illusion of space. However, I don't think it's these visual techniques that give the piece its famed place in history, however brilliant they are. Again, if we go back to its physical place within the stanza, we see that philosophy is represented in equitable size, at least, to theology. It exemplifies the power of humans not completely at the whim of religion, but able to control their actions and destiny, and artists attaining a degree of freedom of expression that evolved from their new position as celebrated intellectuals within society, rather than manual artists. And most importantly, we have the idea of debate. The philosophers are debating within the painting, theology and philosophy debating within the stanza, which represents a broader debate between the general populace and the previous complete autocracy of the church, which is what ultimately leads to a counter-reformation following the Renaissance. I think that's why people adore this painting so much, because it reminds us that we always have the power to debate, no matter our circumstances. Hello everyone! So, I have some questions for you all to get the discussion going. Firstly, why do you think that this piece has earned its revered place in art history? I'd like to know if you have any questions about the philosophers. I'll do my best to try and answer them. But like I said, there's lots of debate surrounding the identification of the figures, particularly around important philosophers like Socrates. But I can do my best. And finally, I set you all a challenge. Raphael painted himself into this painting. It's quite small though, and I challenge you all to try and find him. There's a portrait that I put at the beginning of the movie, and he looks pretty similar, just so you have something to go off. Good luck, and let me know if you have any other questions.